I'm Richie from the Fairy Tale Podcast, or like Zoinks Gaming in other places. Okay, first, let me just start off by saying I like RWBY. I have reviewed episodes of RWBY, I have done work on abridged episodes of RWBY, and I've been watching it on a weekly basis when volumes start back up. I got a first membership to Rooster Teeth specifically for RWBY. And I know I'm gonna get hated on by some people for this. The first 2 volumes of RWBY were boring. Don't get me wrong, the action was solid. There were moments of excitement, but the plot dragged too much. It felt too much like so many other slice of life / school anime that dealt with girls with cool powers. Volumes 1 and 2 didn't have enough really going on to make them stand out from so many other anime out there on the market. So, halfway through Volume 2, I stopped watching. A lot of the interactions or personalities of the girls in the first volume of the show were pretty typical for someone who watches a lot of anime. The second episode was mostly me going, oh, they're going to be that type of character. While there were original concepts about the world and the fighting styles that kept me interested, the characters didn't really have much in the way of progression or change. And while the show did have some interesting moments, it had just as many predictable and dry moments too. Jean's arc with bullying was super predictable. In fact, pretty much everything going on with Jean for volumes 1 and 2 was pretty predictable. Volume 1 felt like an anime trope checklist. Adorable innocent girl, check. With badass monster slaying powers, check. Give her some friends who are dark, brooding, silent, Blake, okay, check. How about a peppy, high-spirited, leap first, look later type? Okay, that'll be Yang, check. Snooty, abrasive, and prissy? Why not? Weiss, does she have a lot of money? Is that why she's prissy? Yes, check. Then throw them all in a high school setting. Check. This is gonna be good. Oh, add in a lot of popular anime jokes. And check-a-rooney. And don't get me wrong, the concept of RWBY when I first heard it sounded awesome. I love the fact that there was a girl power show where they were awesome fighters who weren't sexualized. At least, not in the show. That's right. I'm talking to you. You know what you did? Oscar was crying for 3 whole weeks. He is a precious cinnamon bun. How dare you? How dare you? But I digress. This was something I felt we really needed. It falls in line with shows like Legend of Korra and Steven Universe in that regard. And it doesn't make male viewers feel depreciated either. No one is trashing the other gender, and there's no harm between the 2 genders in the actual show just because there are 4 strong girls in the lead. And you don't feel ashamed to watch the show because it happens to be animated and have all female leads. But I'm sick of hearing the argument that it's all gone downhill since Monty passed away. Okay, the show didn't have a script made of gold. Not every episode was perfect. And there are many, like me, who actually stopped watching during volumes 1 and 2. Because it was so predictable, and the characters weren't challenged or made very little or no progress in character development. In fact, Volume 4 was still like that in the first half. The redeeming qualities for Volumes 1 and 2, and more so in Volume 3, were the villains. It was Roman that made Volume 1 bearable for me, and Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury that made me stick around for Volume 2 as long as I did. But it wasn't until the end of Volume 3 when things finally got interesting, and plot started to really move forward. My Hero Academia does a lot of the same things that RWBY tried to do in the first volume, but My Hero Academia did it in a way that seemed completely fresh and original. Now, I didn't get back into RWBY until Volume 4 started up, or around the time that the hype was beginning to build for RWBY for Volume 4, and you can thank a few of my friends over at Crunchyroll for telling me to give it another chance and watch Volume 3. So I binged watched Volumes 1 and 2 because I honestly had forgotten most of what happened. And unfortunately, the parts that stuck with me from the first 2 volumes were the parts I didn't like, or the super predictable moments. But I hung in there because I was told Volume 3 was a game changer. And dear God, it was. Yes, there were some very predictable parts, but it was how the characters were going to react to those events that actually made it so interesting. Now, I understand why Volume 4 was getting a lot of crap for the writing, for the most part. Most of that volume felt like exposition and world building, and there was too much of that. But at the same time, there were a lot of really good things that happened too. Thanks to Volume 4, my least favorite character, Weiss, became my 3rd favorite character, because she didn't get exposition, she got development. Oh yes, sweet, sweet character development. I was so happy to see some changes really happening to these characters, and Yang's PTSD was played so well in Volume 4. And speaking as an army vet who has friends that are going through PTSD, I cannot tell you not only how accurate, but how touching it was that they went through that with Yang. Seriously, hats off to you, Barb. That was awesome. I think the humor was done well, but you could tell there was an atmosphere of darkness hovering about Team Ranger when they were trying to be lighthearted. And yeah, you heard me. Ranger, not Junior. Fight me. I have heard so many times that when Monty died, RWBY went downhill. What kind of nostalgia goggles are you wearing when you say that? Because there was so little happening in those first couple of volumes. I don't think that Miles and Carrie are deviating too much from the outline that Monty set up either, because that's a big one that I'm constantly hearing. You guys know he already had a vision for where he wanted the story to go and how it should end up. So I gotta ask this. If Monty were alive and volumes 4 and 5 played out exactly the same, what would be your criticism then? It's easy to have extra love due to nostalgia when someone passes. It's a common thing, and I know there's probably a term for it out there, but I'm lazy and I didn't look it up. Essentially, we only want to remember the good, so you look back at things differently. You have kind of rose-colored glasses about it. But RWBY didn't take a dramatic change in tone because Monty died. It took a dramatic change in tone because Pyrrha died. If you thought that we'd be back to the school and people would be carrying on with their normal lives, but with just a hint of sorrow, you need to look at how people react to extreme situations more closely. I'm not saying that volumes 4 and 5 are amazing or exceptional. They have their problems too. There's pacing, exposition, and not knowing what timeline characters are doing what in. Looking at you, Blake Story in Volume 5. But people seem to be forgetting that the first few volumes had their own share of problems. And if the first 2 volumes, or 3 for some, are the ones you liked and you don't like where things are now, there are plenty of slice of life or school-themed anime you can check out at your leisure. But characters grow up. Shit gets real. Trauma changes you in irreversible ways. And as someone who experienced the death of a loved one really early in life, you don't just bounce back from that. In fact, all of the characters in RWBY took the events at the fall of Beacon remarkably well. I handled it very poorly, but that's not a subject that needs to be shared in this video. Finally, you can't talk about the first few volumes without talking about Poser. The animation crew did a good job with what they had, but the animation wasn't great and it looked choppy at times. This wouldn't have been so bad if the story hadn't been so stagnant in those first 2 volumes. And that, for many people, myself included, is why we can't look back on volumes 1 and 2 with much fondness and think, those were the days. People romanticize the past. Just look at every person who's ever said, things were better back in the day. And they are content working with the advances of modern medicine, technology, or amenities. Nostalgia doesn't make something good. It just blinds you to the bad parts of it. But the first 2 volumes of RWBY weren't great. They weren't masterpieces, and many of us found them boring and stopped watching. That's my unpopular opinion, and I'm sticking to it. I'm Richie Roberts of the Fairy Tale Podcast, and if you like this video, make sure to give it a like. If you don't like my opinion, sadly, YouTube only has a dislike button and not a middle finger one. So I guess you're stuck with that. And if you want to know when more content or unpopular opinions are out, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything we put out. I welcome your opinions in the comments. You are free to trash talk me, and I don't need a white knight. I'm a grown man. I can save myself. If there is an unpopular opinion you think we should tackle next, feel free to let us know. Finally, if you'd like to see more stuff that we do on this channel or would like to know other projects I work on, please make sure to poke around the description below. And as always, keep watching more anime.
Yes, I